Why did the sky look so calm when everything beneath it was about to break? Lieutenant Luna Thompson couldn't stop asking herself that question as she guided the US-60 Blackhawk across an endless sweep of jagged mountains. From 3,500 feet, the landscape looked almost gentle, deep green folds of pine and cedar stitched together by a silver river. But Luna knew better. She'd been warned in the briefing. These valleys swallowed helicopters whole. Narrow gorges that channeled wind like a knife. Hillsides thick enough to hide 100 rifles. And now, under a sky as bright as polished steel, she felt a tightness in her chest that her training told her to ignore. She checked her gauges, fingers moving with quiet precision. Engine temps nominal, rotor RPM steady. Nothing wrong, nothing except the unshakable sense that the air itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the cabin held 5 soldiers who trusted her with their lives. She could hear their muted conversation over the intercom, low voices trading stories meant to pass the flight time and keep nerves at bay. Sergeant Brandt, team leader, calm as stone. Sergeant Webb, the medic, joking about the cold rations back at base. Staff Sergeant Jake Porter, the comms specialist, humming a tune that Luna half recognized but couldn't name. Amanda Cross, young but lethal, her silence more focused than nervous. And Leo Kane, demolitions expert whose laugh always sounded like trouble. Beside Luna in the co-pilot seat sat Captain Ethan Reeves, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he scanned the ridges for threats. Routine extraction, they'd told her. In and out. Home before dinner. But routine missions had a way of turning into something else. Her father had told her that years ago, long before flight school, back when he was teaching her to shoot an M4 in the dry Nevada desert. Never trust a mission just because the map looks easy, he'd said, squinting against the sun. Maps don't shoot back. At the time, she'd rolled her teenage eyes. Now, with the wind flickering across her face and 1,000 hidden valleys below, she felt the weight of his words like a second heartbeat. Approaching waypoint Charlie, Reeves reported, his voice a steady counterpoint to the restless thoughts in her head. No contacts on the scope. Copy, Luna said. Her own voice sounded distant in her helmet. ETA to pick up 5 minutes. 5 minutes. She pictured the intel team they were here to retrieve. Anonymous operatives crouched somewhere in the brush, their faces already blending into the long list of people she'd ferried in and out of places the world wasn't supposed to know existed. She wondered if they ever thought about the pilots who carried them through hostile skis. Probably not. That was fine. She didn't do this for thanks. A flicker of motion caught her eye, something too fast, too bright against the calm horizon. She stiffened. You see that? Reeves followed her gaze. Nothing, probably glare off the river. But her gut said otherwise. The flash had shape, purpose. She opened her mouth to call it in when the world erupted. A sharp hiss, a contrail slicing up from the tree line. For one impossible instant she recognized the signature, RPG, and then the missile struck the tail rotor with a sound that stole the air from her lungs. The Blackhawk lurched sideways, warning alarms howling through the cockpit. The calm sky shattered into chaos. Tail rotor failure, Reeves shouted, hands dancing across the instrument panel. I've got it, Luna barked, forcing steel into her voice even as the helicopter spun. Her left foot jammed the pedal, her right hand feathered the collective, fighting to keep them level. Trees rushed up in a green blur. Every instinct screamed to pull back, but training ruled. 7 seconds to impact. She counted without meaning to. 6, 5. In the cargo bay, someone cursed. Gear clattered. The Blackhawk groaned like a wounded animal. Brace for impact, Luna yelled. Her voice cracked over the intercom. She thought of her father again, of those dusty afternoons when he'd made her walk the Nevada scrub with a rifle slung across her shoulder, insisting that every pilot should know how to fight on the ground. She laughed back then. Now the memory tasted like prophecy. Branches tore across the windshield as the Blackhawk ripped through the canopy. The world became a blur of green and brown and screaming metal. Her helmet slammed against the side window. Sparks lit the cockpit like lightning. She pulled the collective with every ounce of strength, buying one more second, then another until impact. A sound like the earth itself snapping. The floor kicked upward, driving the breath from her lungs. For a heartbeat she floated in a haze of noise and darkness. Then silence. A silence so sudden it rang in her skull. "Sound off," Sergeant Brandt's voice cut through the ringing. "Everybody alive." One by one the answers came. Reeves, Webb, Porter, Cross, Kane. Luna swallowed hard, tasted blood. "Lieutenant Thompson here," she managed. The smell of fuel and scorched wiring filled her nose. She unbuckled, her muscles trembling with the aftershock. Her body screamed in pain, but nothing felt broken. Outside, smoke drifted upward through shattered branches. Bran appeared in the doorway, rifle ready, eyes sharp despite the blood streaking his temple. "This bird's done. Move, move." Luna reached behind her seat for the tactical vest and med kit she always kept ready. Her fingers brushed cold steel. The M4 carbine her father had pressed into her life before she ever soloed a helicopter. A pilot who can't fight on the ground is just waiting to become a prisoner. She heard his gravelly voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. Without hesitation, she slung the rifle and grabbed every magazine she could carry. They spilled into the forest, boots sinking into damp moss, the wreck smoldering behind them. 50 meters out, Brandt halted in a shallow ravine. "Porter, comms." The communications specialist twisted dials, shook his head. "Primary antennas fried. Terrain's killing everything else. We're dark." "Then we walk," Brandt said flatly. He pulled a folded map from his vest, his gloved finger tracing valleys and ridgelines. "Extraction points 20 clicks east. We were 10 short when we took the hit. Unknown hostiles in pursuit. We move fast and quiet." Engines rumbled in the distance, faint but growing. Luna's stomach tightened. Whoever fired the RPG was already coming to confirm the kill. Brandt's eyes met hers. "Lieutenant, you did good getting us down in one piece. Need your pilot's eye. Best route." Despite the pounding in her head, Luna studied the terrain. Elevation lines and ridges leapt off the map. "Northeast. There's a ridgeline here," she said, pointing. "High ground, might give us line of sight for comms. 8 clicks as the crow flies, 10 with terrain." "Good, cross on point. Webb and Reeves center. Kane with them. Porter, work that radio while we move. Thompson, rear guard with me." Luna hesitated. "Sergeant, I can do more than navigate. I'm an expert marksman." Brandt gave her a long look, then nodded once. "Good to know. Let's hope we don't need it." They moved. The forest closed around them, dense, damp, full of secrets. Every sound seemed sharpened. The snap of a twig, the rustle of unseen wings, the steady rhythm of their boots. Luna kept her rifle ready, scanning the trail behind them, heart thrumming in time with each cautious step. Minutes bled into half an hour. The engines faded, then returned stronger. Voices floated through the trees, harsh, urgent, too close. The hunters were coming. Cross raised a fist and the column froze. Through a tangle of undergrowth, Luna saw what had stopped her. A village of rough timber huts, maybe 20 structures where men with rifles moved in practiced formation. Vehicles idled near a central square. Brandt's jaw tightened. This wasn't in the intel brief. "They've got our crypto gear," Porter whispered suddenly, eyes wide. Luna followed his gaze and felt her stomach clench. One of the fighters carried the black box salvaged from their downed Blackhawk. Secure communications, classified codes. Brandt exhaled through his nose. "If they crack that." "They won't get the chance," he said finally, his voice like stone. "We create a distraction, slip past on the far ridge." Cross's faint smile was almost feral. "I can make them think a platoon out here." Brandt gave the signal. The team spread into firing positions, careful angles, clear escape routes. Luna nestled behind a fallen log, cheek pressed to the rifle stock, sights trained on the village center. Her breathing slowed, the world narrowing to crosshairs and heartbeat. 3, 2, 1, execute. The forest erupted. Controlled bursts cracked like thunder. Luna squeezed the trigger, aiming for vehicles and equipment rather than men. Chaos bloomed instantly, fighters diving for cover, shouting orders drowned by gunfire that came from everywhere and nowhere. Engines roared, weapons barked blindly into the trees. "Move," Brant ordered. They vanished into the green while the enemy fired at ghosts. Luna's legs pumped, every muscle tuned to escape. The cacophony behind them faded to a confused echo. But the silence that followed was worse. Somewhere back there, men were regrouping. Somewhere, the hunt had only just begun. What if the silence wasn't safety at all, but the sound of predators getting closer? Luna's boots struck the earth in a rhythm that matched her heart. The team moved through the pine-dark forest without words, every step a gamble between speed and stealth. Above, the sky had shifted from glassy blue to a smoky gray that threatened rain. The air felt heavier, as if the mountains themselves were leaning in to listen. Behind them came only the echo of their own footfalls until Cross stiffened. She raised a hand, palm flat, and the column froze. Luna dropped to a crouch, the smell of wet bark filling her lungs. Faint at first, then unmistakable, the grind of engines, not the distant growl they'd heard before. Closer, lower, hunting. Brant eased up beside her. "They're fanning out," he whispered. "Multiple vehicles, maybe quads, they'll try to box us in." Luna nodded once. Words felt dangerous. She kept scanning the underbrush, eyes sharpening on every flicker of movement. Through a lattice of ferns, she caught the faint shimmer of headlights threading through the trees, weaving like searchlights in the fog. "Stay north," Brant signaled with 2 fingers. The team angled left, using a narrow game trail that snaked toward higher ground. The forest grew steeper, boulders slick with moss. Luna's calves burned, but she forced her pace, every step a silent argument against fatigue. They had to stay ahead. If the hunters closed the distance before the ridge, the fight would be on their terms. Porter fell back toward her as they climbed. "Still nothing," he whispered, lifting his radio like a lifeline. "Terrain's killing the signal." "Keep trying," Luna said, her voice low but firm. "Once we hit that ridge, we'll get a clean line." He nodded, jaw tight. They both knew that clean line might come too late. The trail narrowed to a knife edge. A single misstep would send them sliding into a ravine choked with black water. Cross moved ahead like a ghost, every sense tuned to danger. Kane followed, the bulk of his demolitions pack somehow making him no louder than falling leaves. Reeves, pale but determined, kept up despite the blood matting his hair. Webb hovered near him, protective but unobtrusive, a medic's instincts in every glance. Luna stayed rear guard, Brant just ahead of her. She could feel his watchfulness like a current, steady, unyielding. "How's the head?" he asked quietly. "I've had worse landings," she said. The half-smile that tugged at his mouth was brief but real. They pushed upward until the trees thinned and the air sharpened with altitude. The fading light stretched shadows across the slope. Luna checked her watch, barely an hour since the crash. It felt like a lifetime. Then shouts, not theirs, behind them, closer than she wanted to believe. Cross hissed into the calm. "Contact rear, at least 8, moving fast." Brant's voice hardened. "They've got trackers, they found the trail." A cold surge swept through Luna's chest. She pictured the hunters, faces she'd never see clearly, eyes she'd never forget, closing the distance with patient certainty. "How far to the ridge?" Brant asked, turning toward her. She scanned the contour lines on the map, then the slope ahead. "Half a click, maybe less." "Then we run," Brant said. "No hesitation. If they catch us on this incline, we're dead." The team broke into a sprint. Subtlety vanished. Branches snapped beneath their boots, pebbles skittered down the ravine walls. Luna's lungs burned, each breath a knife. Her legs screamed for rest, but the sound of pursuit was a sharper pain. Shouts echoed like thunder, and then the first shots cracked through the twilight. Bark exploded from a tree trunk inches from her shoulder. The mountain itself seemed to flinch. "Move," Brant urged, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't look back." But Luna did, just once. Figures emerged from the shadowed trail, 8, maybe more dark shapes bounding upward with ruthless speed. Muzzle flashes flickered like lightning bugs in the gloom. Bullets snapped through the air, vicious little sighs of metal. Adrenaline flooded her veins. She gripped the M4 tighter, forcing her body to give more than it had left. Every second counted. Every step was a defiance. The forest thinned without warning, and suddenly they burst onto a wide, rocky ledge. The world opened beneath them. A vast green valley stretched to every horizon, their crash site a tiny scar of smoke in the distance. Wind whipped across the ridge, carrying the sharp scent of stone and pine. They made the high ground. "Defensive positions," Brant barked. "This is where we hold." The team scattered with trained precision. Cross set up behind a jagged boulder, rifle already finding lanes of fire. Kane slid behind a fallen tree, checking grenades with practiced speed. Webb crouched beside Reeves, steadying his aim despite the pilot's blood-streaked face. Porter dropped to a knee near the center, radio in one hand, rifle in the other, scanning for signal. Luna found a hollow behind a slab of granite, heart hammering. She checked her magazines. 3 left, 45 rounds. Not enough, but it would have to do. Brant crouched beside her, eyes narrowing toward the tree line below. "They'll come straight up. They think we're prey." "We aren't," Luna said quietly. He gave a single nod, a small acknowledgement of the steel in her voice. Moments stretched. The sky darkened from pewter to iron. Then movement, shadows breaking from the trees. 8 figures became 10, then more, climbing with lethal intent. Cross's rifle cracked, the shot echoing across the ridge. A figure tumbled backward. Another shout, more gunfire. The fight had begun. Luna exhaled and squeezed her trigger. Her first burst dropped a man who was trying to flank left. She shifted, found another target, fired again. Her father's training whispered through her muscles. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. She forced her breathing into the rhythm of survival. Below, the enemy regrouped, returning fire in wild bursts. Bullets chipped the stone near her head, sending shards into her cheek. She barely flinched, adjusting her aim, answering each flash with calm precision. Any station, Porter shouted over the gunfire, voice tight with static. "This is Bravo 7, survivors of a downed Blackhawk, requesting immediate extraction. Coordinates to follow." A round sparked off the rock inches from his helmet. He ducked, finished the call. "Fast movers inbound, ETA 10 minutes, evac 20 behind." "Then we hold for 10, Brant said, as if 10 minutes were an ordinary measure of time. Luna's mind fractured into sharp details. The grit under her gloves, the tang of cordite, the echo of her own heartbeat. A fighter darted toward a gully on their left flank. Cross called the movement. "Gully, left." "Kane, grenade," Brant ordered. Kane pulled the pin with a practiced flick and lobbed the grenade in a perfect arc. A muffled blast, a plume of dust, then silence from the gully. The enemy pressed harder, desperation driving them. More shapes appeared at the tree line. Luna shifted, found her next target, and fired. Her world narrowed to sight, picture, and breath. Minutes bled away. Porter shouted updates like a countdown to salvation. 8 minutes, 6. Each number was both hope and torture. A burst of fire chewed the rock near Luna's position. She ducked, felt granite chips sting her face. When she rose, another fighter was charging up the slope, eyes locked on her. She fired twice. He fell. More climbed behind him. 5 minutes. Her last magazine, 20 rounds. She made them count. Another fighter broke through, closer than any before, less than 10 meters away. His AK rose as her swung. Time slowed. She saw the tension in his finger, the tiny contraction of muscle that meant death. Then a blur. Reeves, injured and staggering, hurled himself sideways into the attacker, tackling him in a tangle of limbs. The rifle skittered across the rock. Luna couldn't get a clean shot. She dropped her M4, drew her sidearm, and closed the gap. 2 shots, point blank. The man went limp. Reeves rolled off, breathing hard. "Thanks." "Any time, Captain," she said, though her voice trembled with the aftershock. 2 minutes. The sky answered with a growing roar, a low, predatory hum that built into a scream. F-16s sliced across the horizon, their engines shaking the ridge. The enemy faltered. Another pass from the jets and the hunters broke, retreating down the slope in a chaotic spill of bodies and echoes. Porter's voice lifted above the din. "Evac inbound, 30 seconds." Luna slumped back against the stone, muscles quivering, ears ringing. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself a single, fragile thought: we might live through this. Brant crouched beside her, eyes scanning the retreating enemy. "Not done yet," he said quietly, but there was something in his tone, pride maybe, that steadied the tremor in her chest. And then, like an answered prayer, the deep whoop-whoop of rotor blades rolled across the ridge. A Blackhawk, flanked by 2 Apache gunships, skimmed the treetops and flared into a hover above the ledge. Green smoke billowed where Kane had marked the landing zone. The Apache circled, weapons trained outward like silent guardians. "Everyone on," Brant shouted. "Move, move." They ran for the bird, feet barely touching the stone. Luna half-supported Reeves, the two of them stumbling into the open cabin as the crew chief hauled them inside. Kane, Webb, Porter, Cross, and finally Brant followed in a blur of motion. The Blackhawk lifted, rotors beating the air into submission. Through the open door, Luna watched the ridgetop shrink beneath them, stones, smoke, and the ghosts of a fight they should never have survived. Only when the ground fell away did she realize her hands were shaking. The weight of the M4 across her lap felt heavier than it ever had. She exhaled a long, shuddering breath. They were alive. But Luna knew something vital, something she couldn't yet put into words. Survival was only part of the story. What this night had carved into her, the fear, the defiance, the quiet resolve, would stay long after the echoes of gunfire faded. And the mission, whatever it truly was, wasn't finished. How long can a single breath of relief last before the weight of everything returns? The Blackhawk's rotors hammered the night air, a deep rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo inside Luna's chest. She sat against the cold interior wall, helmet tipped back, eyes fixed on the shrinking silhouette of the ridge where minutes earlier they'd fought for their lives. From this altitude, the battleground looked small, almost harmless, just a scatter of dark stones beneath a sweep of moonlit clouds. Yet every detail of it burned inside her. The smell of gunpowder, the sting of granite shards, the sudden stillness after each shot. Reeves leaned beside her, one hand pressed to the bloody bandage on his head. His breathing was rough but steady. Across the cargo bay, Webb crouched over Kane, checking for injuries that adrenaline had masked. Cross methodically broke down her rifle, motion calm and distant. Porter hunched over his radio gear, reporting coordinates and casualty counts, his voice clipped and professional. Brant sat nearest the open door, eyes never leaving the darkness beyond, as if the enemy might somehow claw its way into the sky. Outside, the escorting Apache floated like predatory shadows, their running lights dim, weapon pods scanning the black ridges below. Every few seconds one would flare outward, a silent warning to anyone who might consider a final, desperate shot. Luna's hands would not stop shaking. She pressed them together in her lap until her gloves creaked, trying to quiet the tremor. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a delayed realization that her body had survived something it shouldn't have. She drew a slow breath, tasting cordite and engine oil. Her father's voice surfaced again, calm and relentless. "Stay in the fight until it's truly over. Then breathe." The intercom crackled. "Crew chief to survivors, we're 20 minutes from base. Hold tight." 20 minutes. It sounded short, but the seconds stretched like wire. Each vibration of the rotor blades marked another fragment of the day she'd never forget. Brant shifted closer, breaking the silence. "Hell of a landing back there, Lieutenant." She met his eyes, surprised by the warmth in his tone. I crashed us into a forest. You landed a crippled bird with a dead tail rotor, under fire, and everyone walked away. There's a difference. The words hit harder than she expected. For the first time she allowed a small, tired smile. I'll take that. He studied her for a long beat. And you fought, kept your head when a lot of pilots would have frozen. You saved lives tonight. Luna wanted to deflect, to claim it was all training, all team effort. But something in his gaze told her he already knew that. She only nodded, the praise settling like an unexpected weight. Wind buffeted the fuselage, making the cabin shudder. Reeves winced but didn't complain. Webb tightened the bandage on his forehead, murmuring something reassuring. Cross kept her eyes down, lips pressed thin, as if replaying each shot she'd fired. Kane leaned back with an almost casual grin, though his knuckles were white on his weapon. Porter finished his report and finally looked up, exhaustion etched across his face. For a while no one spoke. The hum of engines and the occasional crackle of radio chatter filled the space. Luna let her head rest against the bulkhead and stared at the stars through the open door. They were impossibly bright out here, far from city lights, cold fires burning in a velvet sky. She wondered if her mother, long gone but never far from thought, might somehow be among them. The idea was irrational, but tonight everything felt closer to the edge of belief. Reeves broke the quiet first. When we lifted off this morning, he said hoarsely, I was thinking about catching the game tonight. Now I'm just glad to be breathing. Kane gave a low chuckle. I was thinking about a hot shower, still am. Brant shook his head, a dry smile ghosting across his face. Perspective, gentlemen. Survival has a way of rearranging priorities. Luna found herself laughing softly despite the ache in her chest. The sound felt almost foreign, but necessary. The pilot of their rescue bird called back from the cockpit. We're entering friendly airspace. Expect a bumpy descent. Outside, the Apache banked, their silhouettes carving dark arcs across the moon. The base lights appeared on the horizon, a distant cluster of gold against the black desert. Relief washed through Luna, but it came tangled with something else, a strange, hollow ache. She realized she wasn't only glad to be safe. She was reluctant, as though stepping back into ordinary life might diminish the fierce clarity she'd felt on that ridge. The helicopter flared and settled onto the landing pad with a soft thump. Dust swirled around the cabin in a warm, dry cloud. As the engines wound down, ground crews rushed forward, medics in tow. The crew chief signaled the all-clear. You're home, he said simply. One by one, they disembarked, boots hitting the tarmac with a heaviness born of exhaustion. Medics swarmed them immediately, checking vitals, inspecting wounds. Webb protested that others needed treatment more. Kane made a joke about finally getting that shower. Cross remained silent, her eyes scanning the perimeter like the fight wasn't finished. Reeves allowed the medic to guide him toward a stretcher only after Luna gave him a look that brokered no argument. Before they could be led toward the infirmary, a tall figure approached with deliberate strides. A full colonel, his uniform immaculate despite the late hour. His presence drew the automatic response from every soldier. Back straight, heels together, fatigue momentarily forgotten. At ease, the colonel said, though his expression stayed sharp. He swept his gaze over the group, pausing on each face as if reading a story there. You're Brant's team, the Blackhawk survivors. Yes, sir, Brant answered. The colonel's eyes narrowed slightly, appraising them with a mix of scrutiny and something like respect. Preliminary reports say you evaded capture, neutralized multiple hostile elements, and safeguarded critical intelligence. Accurate. Brant's reply was careful. We did what was necessary to survive and complete the mission, sir. Necessary, the colonel repeated, tasting the word. Then his gaze fixed on Luna. Lieutenant Thompson, you were the pilot. Yes, sir. First time being shot down. Yes, sir. How'd you like it? The question was so unexpected that Luna almost smiled. Wouldn't recommend, sir. For a heartbeat, the colonel's stern mask cracked into a faint grin. Good answer. His tone softened barely. I'm told you not only brought your aircraft down without loss of life but also engaged in ground combat. True. Yes, sir. Sergeant Brandt needed every rifle. And you're qualified. Expert marksman, sir. My father insisted. Smart man, your father. The colonel turned back to Brandt. Sergeant, your assessment. Brandt didn't hesitate. She saved all our lives, sir, more than once. I'd fly with her again without question. The colonel gave a slow nod, the kind that carried weight. Noted. He addressed the group as a whole. What you accomplished today will be studied, analyzed, and taught. 6 soldiers cut off in hostile territory not only survived but disrupted enemy operations. That's not luck. That's skill, training, and courage. Well done. He started to leave, then paused. Lieutenant Thompson, stand by for further orders. There's interest in your particular skill set. Special Operations Aviation will want a word. Luna felt her pulse quicken. That name, Special Operations, was whispered among pilots like a distant dream, the best of the best. She managed a crisp, "Yes, sir," though her voice felt far away. When the colonel strode off, Brandt turned to her with a half grin. Welcome to the weird world of being good at your job. The medics finally pulled them toward the infirmary. The fluorescent lights inside felt too bright after the mountain shadows. They were examined in silence, one by one. Webb argued again that he was fine. Kane joked with the nurse, earning an eye roll. Cross endured the process wordlessly. Reeves was treated for his gash and mild concussion. Luna submitted to every check, her body registering bruises she hadn't noticed, each one a quiet testament to survival. By the time she stepped back into the night air, the base had gone still. Training flights hummed in the distance, their rotor beats faint and familiar. The adrenaline that had carried her through firefight and escape now drained completely, leaving only bone-deep fatigue. Her quarters were dim and quiet. She peeled off the torn, smoke-stained flight suit and stood under the shower until the water turned cold. For a long while she just let it fall, the heat a fragile shield against the day's memories. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, she felt almost human again. Almost. Her phone buzzed with messages, other pilots demanding details, friends checking if she was alive, her commanding officer requesting a morning debrief. But one message stilled her. Heard you had some excitement today. Call when you can. Proud of you, kid. Her father. Luna sank onto the narrow bunk and hit call. He answered on the first ring. Luna, you okay? I'm okay, Dad, she said, voice catching. Tired, sore, but okay. Tell me, he said softly. And so she did. She told him about the flash of the RPG, the fight to keep the bird aloft, the crash through the trees. She described the run through the forest, the firefight on the ridge, the roar of the F-16s. She didn't spare the fear or the exhaustion. He listened without interrupting, the way he always had when she was a child and came home from a hard day of flight training. When she finally fell silent, he said, voice thick, You used everything I ever taught you, every bit of it, the shooting, the navigation, the mindset. You were ready. I kept hearing your voice, she admitted, every step. There was a pause, the sound of him breathing through emotions he rarely showed. Your mother would be proud too, so damn proud. Tears threatened, hot and uninvited. Luna blinked hard, staring at the ceiling. I wish she could have seen it. She did, he said quietly. Wherever she is, she saw it, and she's smiling. They stayed on the line a few more minutes, his calm words wrapping around her like a steadying hand. When they finally said goodnight, Luna lay back, staring at the shadows above her bunk. The base outside hummed with the endless cycle of military life, but inside her head the day replayed in fragments. The moment of impact, the firefight's chaos, the quiet after victory. Sleep should have come easily. It didn't. She understood something now that no training exercise had ever taught her. Surviving combat wasn't just about reflexes or skill. It was about finding the small, stubborn piece of yourself that refuses to break, and realizing you never truly know it's there until the world tries to take it from you. Eventually, exhaustion won. Her eyes closed to the faint lullaby of distant rotor blades, the sound of helicopters training in the night. Soon she would be back in one of those cockpits, flying into the dark once more. But tonight she allowed herself a final thought before sleep pulled her under. I can handle whatever comes next. Why did the morning feel heavier than the night that came before? Luna awoke to the pale glow of dawn pushing through the barracks window, the faint hum of helicopters already rising over the base. For a moment she lay still, listening to the familiar rhythm of rotor blades in the distance. Normally that sound meant comfort, another day of flight, another mission in the skis she loved. But this morning the hum felt different, almost like an echo of everything she'd endured on the ridge. Her body ached in quiet protest as she swung her legs over the side of the bunk. Bruises bloomed across her arms and ribs, each one a dark memory of impact and recoil. She pulled on her dress uniform with slow precision, smoothing the creases until every line was sharp. Today, she'd been ordered to stand with her team for an official commendation. Recognition, medals, words spoken in ceremony to define a day that could never really be defined. Outside, the desert air carried a chill that seeped into her lungs and cleared her thoughts. Soldiers moved in steady patterns across the tarmac, maintenance crews, flight preps, the living pulse of the base already in motion. Luna walked toward the command building, her steps measured, each one a silent rehearsal for the hours ahead. The briefing room smelled faintly of coffee and cold metal. Sergeant Brandt was already there with the rest of the team. Reeves stood tall despite the white bandage across his forehead. Webb's sleeves were rolled neatly, the medic's calm returning after the storm. Kane wore a grin that didn't quite hide the fatigue in his eyes. Cross leaned against a wall, silent as ever, her gaze distant. Porter fiddled with the radio pack he refused to leave behind, as if another emergency might erupt at any moment. They greeted her with nods, quiet smiles. No need for words. They had shared too much for small talk to matter. At precisely 900, a staff officer appeared. "The colonel will see you now." They filed into the command chamber, the air suddenly formal, heavy with expectation. The base commander stood behind a polished desk, dress uniform immaculate, a folder open before him. Sunlight cut through the blinds in sharp lines, illuminating the dust motes that swirled like silent witnesses. The colonel's voice carried across the room, deep and deliberate. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations, for valor above and beyond the call of duty, and for actions that saved the lives of fellow soldiers while successfully evading capture in hostile territory. His words flowed like measured drumbeats. One by one he called their names, reciting each deed as though chiseling it into stone. When he reached Luna, he paused, eyes locking onto hers. "Lieutenant Luna Thompson," he said, "your actions demonstrated exceptional courage and skill. You brought your crew down safely after catastrophic damage, then fought on the ground to protect them. You navigated treacherous terrain under pursuit, and you stood your ground until rescue arrived. For these acts, the Army awards you the Silver Star." He stepped forward with a small black case. The metal gleamed as he pinned it to her chest, the cool weight settling against her heart. "There has been discussion," he continued, voice softening just slightly. "Some believe a pilot engaging in ground combat exceeds proper authority." For a heartbeat, Luna felt the air tighten. Was this the moment when commendation turned into reprimand? The colonel's eyes narrowed in faint amusement. "Those people," he said, "have never been shot at. You did what had to be done. You protected your crew. You brought them home alive. That is exactly what we expect from our officers." Relief mixed with something deeper, pride, yes, but tempered by the memory of what it had cost. Luna saluted, her hand steady despite the surge of emotion. "Dismissed," the colonel concluded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And Lieutenant, Try not to crash any more of my helicopters." "No promises, sir," she answered, the smallest spark of humor breaking through. Laughter rippled across the room, a soft release after so much gravity. Outside the chamber, the team drifted into the sunlight, metals catching the morning light. Soldiers they barely knew stopped to offer handshakes, nods of respect, quiet words of admiration. But as the crowd thinned, the six of them found themselves together again, a small island of silence amid the hum of the bass. Brant stepped closer, something hidden in his palm. "Got something for you," he said, handing her a small cloth patch. Black background, silver wings stitched above a scroll that read Ernitit. Luna turned it over carefully. "What is it?" "Unofficial combat patch," Brant explained. "For helicopter pilots who have had to fight on the ground. Only about a dozen of us. Welcome to the club." She traced the stitching with her thumb, the weight of the gesture sinking in. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Brant replied, his voice warm but firm. "For getting us down alive, for fighting beside us, for being exactly the kind of pilot we need." He walked away, leaving her with the patch and a silence that carried more meaning than any medal. Luna remained there for a moment, watching the team disperse into the ordinary rhythm of base life. Reeves heading toward the med bay for a follow-up, Webb offering a quiet word to a young medic, Kane joking with a group of mechanics, Cross slipping away without a sound, Porter already lost in a fresh tangle of radio frequencies. For the first time since the crash, Luna stood truly alone. She turned toward the flight line. Helicopters lifted into the bright afternoon, their blades slicing the air with the sound she'd known since childhood. Normally she would feel nothing but anticipation, a pilot's instinct to join them, to be where she belonged. But now something deeper stirred, an understanding that the cockpit was only part of her story. Her father's words echoed again. A pilot who can't fight on the ground is just waiting to be a prisoner. He'd been right, but incomplete. What he hadn't said, what she'd learned on that ridge, was that no one fights alone. Survival isn't just about skill or courage. It's about trust, about the silent bonds formed when strangers hold the line together. She walked slowly toward the hangar, the desert sun warm on her face. Each step felt deliberate, as if she were crossing from one life into another. The patch in her hand caught the light, silver thread glinting like a quiet promise. At the hangar entrance she paused. Mechanics moved around a freshly serviced Blackhawk, its dark fuselage gleaming under the afternoon sun. The sight stirred a familiar pull, a call to fly again, to push back into the endless sky. She knew she would answer that call. How could she not? Flying wasn't just a job, it was breath, it was home. Yet something fundamental had shifted. She no longer saw herself only as a pilot. She was a soldier who could adapt, fight, and endure, a warrior who happened to fly. The wind kicked up across the tarmac, carrying the faint scent of fuel and distant rain. Luna closed her eyes for a moment, letting it wash over her. In that quiet she sensed the presence of everyone who'd brought her to this point. Her father with his relentless training, her mother whose absence shaped her resolve, the teammates who trusted her in the darkest hours. They were all there, woven into the air she breathed. When she opened her eyes, the horizon stretched wide and bright. Missions would come again, some routine, some deadly. She would fly them all. And when the day arrived that the sky failed her, she knew she would meet the earth with the same steady resolve, the same silent strength. Because sometimes the mission doesn't end when you land. Sometimes that's exactly when it begins. Luna tucked the patch into her pocket and stepped forward, the whir of rotors rising like a familiar heartbeat. Tomorrow she would fly. Tomorrow she would be ready. What remains when the applause fades and the quiet finally arrives? Evening crept across the desert base in slow, honey-colored layers. The ceremony's echo had dissolved into ordinary sounds, distant rotor blades, the scrape of boots on asphalt, the metallic clatter of tools in the hangar. Luna walked away from the flight line alone, her new silver star tucked neatly against her uniform. The weight of it felt strange. Heavy, yes, but not in the way a medal should. It was as if the ribbon carried every heartbeat from the ridge, every bullet that had chipped the rock near her head, every breath of smoke she'd tasted on the run to survival. Her quarters were quiet when she stepped inside. She left the door half open, letting the soft desert wind stir the stale air. The barracks smelled faintly of dust and hydraulic oil, familiar, grounding. She unpinned the medal and set it on the desk, the polished silver catching the fading light like a fragment of the moon. For a long time she simply stood there staring at it. Recognition, valor, words the colonel had spoken with gravity. Yet what came back to her wasn't the ceremony, but the sound of Reeves's labored breathing as they sprinted uphill, the thunder of grenades, the sudden silence when the enemy finally broke. Those moments lived beyond medals. They belonged to something deeper and harder to name. Her phone buzzed, a small jolt against the hush. A message from Reeves, beer at the rec hall, team, here if you want company. She hesitated. A part of her longed for the simple comfort of their voices, the way shared danger had knit them together. But another part, the quieter, heavier part, wanted to sit with the stillness a while longer. She typed back, maybe later. Luna peeled off her uniform and changed into the soft cotton of a base t-shirt and sweatpants. The bruises on her ribs had deepened to a mottled violet. She touched them gently, a reminder of impact, of survival. When she looked back to the desk, the silver star still glimmered, waiting, patient as the night. Outside, the first stars appeared, hard and cold against the darkening sky. She slipped on a jacket and stepped into the open air, letting the evening wrap around her. The base stretched in quiet symmetry, hangars like dark monoliths, runway lights blinking a slow cadence. Off to the east, a pair of Apache lifted into the night for a training mission, their rotor wash stirring the dry ground. The sound reached into her chest and steadied her heartbeat. Her footsteps led her almost without thought toward the far edge of the tarmac where the desert opened wide. Beyond the perimeter fence, the land was a vast emptiness of sage and rock, the mountains etched in silver by the rising moon. She leaned against the chain link and inhaled the cool air. Here, away from the chatter of the rec hall and the constant motion of the flight line, the day finally began to settle. She thought of her father again, his gravelly voice on the phone the night before, the pride he'd tried and failed to hide. "You were ready," he'd said. He'd trained her to survive, to fight if she had to. But he hadn't trained her for the strange quiet afterward, the way memories looped like film on repeat, the way victory felt less like triumph and more like a quiet ache. Footsteps approached from behind. She turned to find Sergeant Brandt, hands in his jacket pockets, his own silver star catching the moonlight. "Figured I'd find you here," he said. "You always this good at tracking people?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Only the ones who saved my life." He joined her at the fence, staring out at the same endless dark. "Team at the rec hall. Porter's already 3 beers in. Thought you might want to be there." "I will," she said softly. "Just needed a minute." He nodded, understanding without pressing. The desert wind rustled the fence, carrying the faint scent of sage. They stood in silence, 2 shadows against a silver horizon. "Funny thing about medals," Brandt said at last. "People think they tell the story, but they don't." Luna glanced at him. "No, they don't. They don't show the fear," he continued, "or the way it changes you when you realize you might not make it. They don't show the choices you wish you never had to make. Or the people you had to hurt," she added quietly. He gave a slow nod. "Exactly." The silence returned, heavier now but somehow more honest. Luna felt a strange comfort in it, an unspoken understanding that words could never fully capture what they'd lived. After a while Brandt turned, a wry half-smile breaking through the solemnity. "You know, when we took off yesterday morning, I was thinking about nothing more serious than how bad the base coffee is." She laughed softly. "I was planning my next maintenance check. Now here we are, different people." "Yeah," she said, "different." He looked at her carefully. "You thinking about special operations? Word already going around, they'll want you." The idea sent a flicker of heat through her chest. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me wants it. Part of me," she trailed off, searching for words. "Part of you knows what it costs," he finished. She met his eyes, grateful for the understanding. "Exactly." Bran exhaled, the sound almost a sigh. "Whatever you decide, you've already proved something most never get the chance to. You can adapt. You can fight. That's rarer than you think." His words settled between them, quiet but steady. Luna felt their weight and knew they weren't meant as flattery, but as a simple truth. They walked back together in silence. At the rec hall, laughter spilled into the cool night air, Porter's unmistakable voice, Kane's booming response, Cross's quiet chuckle barely audible. Inside, the team welcomed them with easy camaraderie. Glasses clinked, jokes traded, stories already growing into legend. Luna accepted a beer and found herself laughing with them, the sound lighter than she expected. They were more than a crew now. They were a memory she'd carry forever, a bond forged in fire and fear. Reeves raised his glass toward her, to the pilot who landed the impossible. Kane added, grinning, "And then outshot half of us." Brant simply lifted his drink in quiet agreement. Luna felt a warmth that had nothing to do with alcohol spread through her chest. She met their eyes, one by one. "To all of us," she said, "no one gets home alone." The room echoed with a soft chorus of hear as glasses clinked again. Later, when the crowd thinned and the laughter softened, Luna stepped outside once more. The night had deepened, stars burning like cold fire across the velvet sky. She tilted her head back, letting the silence settle. Somewhere beyond those stars her mother's memory lingered, a presence she could almost feel. She thought about the ridge, the fight, the sudden roar of the F-16s. She thought about the next mission that would inevitably come and the quiet strength it would require. And she realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the quiet decision to act despite it, to keep moving when everything told you to stop. The desert wind brushed her face, carrying the faintest scent of rain from distant mountains. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the night air cool and clean. She would fly again. Of that she was certain. The sky still called to her as it always had, but now she understood something her younger self never could. The mission doesn't end when the rotors stop. Sometimes that's exactly when it begins. And when it began again, when the next valley swallowed the next helicopter, when the next desperate call crackled through the radio, she knew she would answer, steady and unafraid. Because some truth live beyond medals and beyond words. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens when a new day asks you to choose who you're going to be? The desert sun rose sharp and golden, spilling across the airfield like molten metal. Luna stood on the balcony outside her quarters, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the flight line come alive. Engines coughed awake, rotors blurred against the morning sky. She should have felt the old thrill, the instinct to climb into a cockpit and disappear into blue. But today there was a different pull, one she hadn't yet named. Her phone buzzed. A simple text from operations, report to Colonel Mercer 800, no explanation, just the next step. She finished the coffee, its bitterness grounding her, and walked toward the command building. Soldiers moved with brisk efficiency around her, faces familiar yet distant. She felt their glances, curiosity, respect, the subtle weight of someone who'd already become a story. It was strange to realize that while she still felt the tremor of yesterday's fight in her bones, for everyone else the base had simply moved on. Colonel Mercer's office was cool and immaculate, blinds half closed against the climbing sun. He stood behind his desk, arms folded, eyes steady. A man who had clearly spent decades reading the unspoken language of soldiers. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, motioning her to a chair. "Sit." She obeyed, back straight, every sense alert. "I'll keep this brief," Mercer began. Your performance during the incident is already under review at the highest levels. Special Operations Aviation has expressed strong interest in bringing you into their program. Night Stalkers. You know what that means. Luna felt a flicker of heat at the name. Every pilot did. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, flew missions no one else dared. She had dreamed of it once back when ambition burned hotter than experience. "Yes, sir," she said. It would mean advanced training, covert deployments, missions with no margin for error, higher risk than anything you've faced, but also the chance to serve at the very edge of what our aviation capability allows. He studied her for a long moment. They need pilots who can adapt, who can fight on the ground if required. You've already proven you can. Luna's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her voice calm. "And my current assignment?" "Temporarily suspended while the review concludes," he said. "You'd have a few weeks to decide. No one will force you, but they'll want an answer sooner than later." She absorbed his words, the weight of possibility settling over her like a second uniform. "Understood, sir." He nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "Whatever you choose, Lieutenant, know this. What you did out there saved lives and altered the mission. That's not forgotten." When she stepped back into the blinding sun, the base looked the same. Hangars, humming engines, the endless sweep of desert. But everything inside her felt subtly rearranged. The offer wasn't just a career move. It was a question about identity, about who she was now that the ridge had tested her and left her changed. She walked without aim, letting her boots choose the path. They led her past the rec hall where she and the team had gathered the night before, past the barracks where laughter spilled from open windows, and finally to the quiet edge of the airstrip where the mountains rose like dark sentinels. Brant found her there, as if he'd known she would drift toward open space. He approached with his easy, deliberate stride, a coffee in one hand, the silver gleam of his metal catching the sun. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said. "Morning, Sergeant. You look like someone carrying a heavy thought." "Maybe," she admitted. He handed her the spare coffee. "Figured you might need this." She accepted with a small nod. They stood side by side, the desert wind tugging at their sleeves. "They offered you the Night Stalkers, didn't they?" he said after a moment. Her eyes widened. "How?" "Word travels," he said with a faint grin. "Good pilots talk, and you're the name on everyone's lips." She stared across the runway, the horizon wavering in the heat. "It's what I always wanted," she said quietly. "Before yesterday, before—" her voice trailed off. "But now," he prompted. "Now I know what it costs," she finished. Brant sipped his coffee, thoughtful. Every choice worth making costs something. The trick is knowing whether the cost is yours to pay. They fell into silence again, the kind that felt less like absence and more like understanding. Later, Luna walked alone toward the maintenance hangar. A Blackhawk waited inside, its dark fuselage gleaming under fluorescent lights. Mechanics worked in practiced rhythm, their tools ringing softly against metal. She trailed her fingers along the cool skin of the helicopter, feeling the faint vibration of potential energy. Flying had always been her anchor, her language. But now, touching the machine that had defined so much of her life, she wondered if the sky alone could ever be enough. Her father's call came that evening. She didn't mention the offer at first, but he heard it in her voice. "Something on your mind," he said. "They want me for special operations," she admitted. "Night Stalkers." There was a pause, a faint crackle of static. "That's the dream, isn't it?" "It was," she said. "I thought it was." "And now?" She searched for words. "Now I think about the ridge, about Reeves bleeding, about the way it felt to pull the trigger and know someone wouldn't get up again. I can fly, I can fight, but I don't know if I want to live in that space forever." Her father's voice softened. "Luna, what you did out there wasn't about wanting or not wanting. It was about who you are when you have no choice. That's different from seeking it." She closed her eyes, letting his words settle. But if I join, I'm choosing it, choosing to live at that edge. That's true, he said. So ask yourself, is it the edge that calls you or the purpose you found there? The question lingered long after they said goodnight. In the days that followed, the base returned to routine, but Luna felt the subtle shift in every step. Training flights droned overhead. Maintenance crews checked systems with methodical patience. She flew short missions, her hands as steady as ever, but each time she lifted off she sensed the decision waiting, silent and immovable. One evening she sought the solitude of the ridge outside the base, a low outcrop that offered a view of the desert stretching to forever. The wind carried the faint scent of rain from distant hills. Stars pricked the sky one by one, cold and brilliant. She thought of the men they'd fought, faces she would never know, lives she'd ended. The memory no longer shocked her, but it hadn't softened either. It sat in her chest, weighty but undeniable. She also thought of her team, Brant's steady presence, Cross's silent precision, Reeves's stubborn grit, Porter's quick mind, Kane's irreverent humor, Webb's quiet care. They had all walked the same knife's edge and come back changed. The bond between them was beyond words, forged in a place few would ever understand. She realized then that her decision wasn't about fear. It wasn't about ambition either. It was about meaning, about where her skills, her heart, and her sense of purpose met. The next morning she found Brant on the flight line, watching a Blackhawk lift into the dawn. "You've decided," he said without looking at her. "I think so." He turned, one eyebrow raised. "And I'll join," she said simply. "Night Stalkers." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then they're getting the best." "It won't be easy," she said. "Nothing worth doing ever is." He extended his hand and she shook it, the gesture firm and unspokenly proud. Later, as she filled out the transfer paperwork, she felt no surge of triumph, only a quiet steadiness. The choice wasn't about chasing danger. It was about answering a call she couldn't deny, a call to serve at the edge where skill and purpose meet, where silence and action are the same. That night she stood once more beneath the wide desert sky. The rotor hum of another departing helicopter rolled across the darkness like a heartbeat. She looked up at the stars, her mother's memory close, her father's words lingering. The decision was made. The path ahead would be hard, but she was ready. Because some missions start long before you lift off, and some never really end. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. How do you prepare for a world that only exists in the dark? The transfer orders arrived 2 weeks later, crisp as a folded blade. Luna read them twice, the black letters steady despite the way her pulse quickened. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Report date, immediate. Night Stalkers. She packed in silence. The desert sun outside her quarters painted everything in a hot, dusty glow. Around her, the base continued its endless cycle, rotor wash kicking up grit, mechanics calling to one another over the whine of turbines. She moved slowly, folding each piece of gear with deliberate care, as if the act itself acknowledged the closing of one life and the opening of another. Before dawn the next morning, Brant met her at the flight line. He wore civilian clothes for once, a plain jacket and the easy half-smile she had come to recognize. "Figured I'd catch you before you disappeared," he said. "I'm not disappearing," she answered, though it felt a little like a lie. "Night Stalkers is its own universe," he said. "Different rules, different nights, but you'll fit." He offered his hand, the same firm grip that had steadied her on the ridge. "You earned this, Lieutenant. Don't forget the rest of us when you're flying ghosts through the dark." She almost smiled. "You think I could forget?" His eyes softened. "No, I don't." They stood there for a quiet beat, the desert wind brushing past, the hum of a waking bass rising behind them. No more words were needed. Fort Campbell smelled of wet earth and jet fuel, a scent Luna would come to associate with transformation. The Night Stalker compound operated under a hush even during daylight. Security was tight. Every gate seemed to carry its own silence. Orientation was brief, unsentimental. "You're here because you're good," the commanding officer said to the small group of incoming pilots. "That won't be enough." The first weeks blurred into relentless motion. Pre-dawn runs through mist-shrouded woods, endurance drills that left her lungs on fire, navigation exercises under moonless skies. Night flights in near-black conditions, cockpit lights off, instruments dimmed until the world became nothing but shadow and instinct. The motto whispered through every corridor, "Night stalkers do quit." Luna learned quickly that here, skill was only the beginning. Calm under pressure was currency. Adaptability was law. During a low-level insertion drill, her Blackhawk skimmed a river barely 10 feet above the water. Fog curled like smoke over the surface, swallowing the horizon. The crew chief's voice cut through the headset. "Obstacle ahead, dead tree mid-channel." Luna's hands moved before thought, banking left so tightly the rotor tips kissed the mist. Her pulse barely spiked. The instructor in the co-pilot seat gave a single nod. "Good," he said, nothing more. Praise was rare. Survival was the real acknowledgement. Yet it wasn't the flying that tested her most. It was the quiet after. The way each night's mission, real or simulated, echoed with memories of the ridge, the flash of muzzle fire, the weight of the M4 in her hands, the lives she had taken. No one here asked about that, but the silence of their eyes said they understood. Weeks stretched into months. Muscles hardened. Reflexes sharpened. Luna found herself growing into the rhythm of the Night Stalkers. The briefings whispered at midnight, the blacked-out helicopters lifting like shadows into moonless skies, the knowledge that every mission might remain a secret forever. She built new bonds too, subtle but strong. Captain Ren Torres, a veteran pilot with eyes like tempered steel, taught her the art of reading the dark, how to feel the wind before it shifted, how to hear the absence of sound before danger arrived. Warrant Officer Harper, quiet and dryly funny, shared midnight coffee during pre-flight checks and never asked about her past but somehow knew when to stand beside her in silence. But even among these new companions, Luna carried the ridge with her. Some nights, after training flights ended and the compound slept, she would walk alone to the edge of the airfield. The Kentucky woods stretched black and endless, their silence different from the desert but just as profound. She would look up at the cold scatter of stars and think of her mother, of her father's voice over the crackle of a phone line, of Brant and the team she'd left behind. Sometimes she felt the echo of that day like a second heartbeat, steady, unyielding. Her father visited once, unannounced, arriving in an old pickup that smelled faintly of desert dust despite the long drive east. He stood by the chain-link fence at dusk, watching the night-ready helicopters like a man studying a rare bird. "Didn't think you'd actually come," Luna said when she spotted him. "Figured I'd see where my kid keeps disappearing to," he replied with a half-smile. They walked the perimeter path as twilight bled into full dark. He listened while she spoke of training flights, of silent approaches and midnight extractions, of the way the forest swallowed sound. She left out the details she couldn't share, but he understood anyway. "You're different," he said finally. "Better or worse?" she asked. "Neither, just more of yourself." He looked at her for a long moment. "You found the place that matches the way you're built." His words landed deep. She realized he was right. The Night Stalkers weren't changing her, they were revealing her. Before he left, he pressed a small object into her palm, a worn compass, brass dulled by years. "Had this in Vietnam," he said. "Never steered me wrong, might help when the sky gives you nothing." Luna closed her fingers around it, the weight a quiet inheritance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Fly safe, kid," he said, pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. "And remember, come home." Months later, her first real deployment arrived without fanfare. The mission details were classified even in the briefing, an insertion into rugged mountain terrain under hostile surveillance, zero margin for error. exactly the kind of operation that had drawn her here. The night of departure, the airfield pulsed with a low electric tension. Her Blackhawk waited like a shadow given form, rotors whispering against the humid Kentucky air. She checked each gauge, each weapon system, every motion precise and calm. As the crew climbed aboard, Captain Torres paused beside her. "First op," he said quietly. "Trust your instincts, the rest will follow." She nodded, the words settling like a second skin. The takeoff was smooth, the world below vanishing into layers of black and deeper black. Clouds swallowed the moon. Instruments glowed faintly, their light barely enough to see by. Hours passed in a silent ballet of navigation, radio discipline absolute. Every muscle in her body was tuned to the subtle language of air and machine. When they reached the insertion point, a narrow valley choked with fog, Luna guided the helicopter down to a landing zone no larger than a living room, trees brushing the rotor tips. Troops disembarked into darkness, ghosts within ghosts. Seconds later they were airborne again, the Blackhawk rising like a breath exhaled. Not a word was spoken until they were back across the border, fuel gauges dipping low. Only then did Torres glance over and offer the faintest smile. "Welcome to the regiment." Luna allowed herself a slow exhale. The mission was over, clean and silent. No ridge, no firefight, only the steady heartbeat of the job done well. Yet she felt the same quiet certainty that had carried her through the valley months before. She could handle it, whatever came. Because she was more than a pilot now, more than a soldier. She was someone who could walk into darkness and not flinch. That night after debrief, she walked alone to the far edge of the compound. The sky was moonless, the stars sharp enough to cut. She held the old brass compass in her hand, its needle trembling toward true north. Somewhere far away, another mission was already forming, an unseen need, a silent call. She didn't know when it would come, only that it would. She thought of the ridge again, of Brant's quiet steadiness, of the team that had become her family for a single impossible day. Their voices lingered like echoes, not haunting, just present. She whispered a small promise to the wind. "I won't forget." The night answered only with silence, but it was enough. Because some journeys don't end. They simply deepen. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. When does a mission truly end? Is it the last landing, the final briefing, or the moment you realize you've become someone else entirely? Months had passed since that first silent deployment, yet time inside the regiment felt different, measured not by days but by the missions that stitched them together. Each operation was a shadow, planned in whispers, executed in darkness, remembered only in the quiet of dawn. Luna had flown through storms that swallowed mountains, slipped through valleys where radar couldn't breathe, and carried soldiers whose names she would never know. The work demanded everything: precision, endurance, the kind of calm that turned fear into fuel. And with each flight she felt the ridge receding, not as a memory erased, but as a foundation, something she stood on every time she lifted into black sky. One cold evening in late autumn, she found herself alone at the far edge of the compound. Frost silvered the grass. The helicopters sat in neat rows, their dark silhouettes glinting beneath a moon sharp enough to carve the night. She leaned against the chain-link fence, the brass compass her father had given her warm in her palm. A faint buzz broke the silence, her phone. A message from Brant, back stateside for a week. "You around?" She stared at the screen, the simple text tugging at something deep and unguarded. Without overthinking, she typed back, "I can get a few days." Where? 2 mornings later, she stepped off a small commuter plane into the thin winter sunlight of Colorado. Brant waited near the terminal, a civilian jacket pulled tight against the chill. The sight of him, steady, unchanged, stirred memories that ran deeper than words. "Thought you'd be taller," he said with a grin. "And I thought you'd be harder to find," she replied. They drove into the mountains, the world outside the windows unfolding in quiet majesty. Snow-laced pines, rivers sealed in glassy ice, the sky an endless pale blue. Conversation came easily. Updates on the team, stories from the base, the kind of soft laughter that lives only between people who have seen each other at their rawest. That evening they hiked a trail that opened to a broad overlook. The valley below glowed in twilight, lights from distant towns flickering like fallen stars. Brant sat on a rock, breath misting in the cold. "I still think about it," he said finally. "The ridge, the sound when the firing stopped." "So do I," she admitted. "Does it fade?" She considered. "It changes, becomes part of you, not a scar exactly, more like a seam in the fabric, always there but it holds you together." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I figured you'd say something like that." They stayed until the sky deepened into velvet, the first stars emerging like promises. When the cold finally pushed them back down the trail, Luna felt an unexpected lightness, as if sharing the silence had loosened something inside her. Back at Fort Campbell, winter training intensified. Missions layered upon missions, each demanding more skill, more quiet resolve. Luna grew sharper, steadier, her instincts honed until even the smallest shift in the wind felt like a spoken word. Yet through the rhythm of midnight flights and dawn landings, she kept a small ritual. After each mission, she would hold her father's compass in her palm, its needle trembling toward a truth deeper than direction. Sometimes she called him, short conversations laced with dry humor and quiet pride. Other times she simply stood alone on the airfield, letting the night speak. And always, in the back of her mind, the ridge remained, its shadow not a weight but a reminder of the moment she learned who she truly was. One mission in early spring pushed the edge again. Extraction of a team pinned in a mountain pass, weather closing fast, enemy movement unpredictable. Luna guided the Blackhawk through crosswinds so fierce the machine trembled like a living thing. Every second demanded her full presence, no room for hesitation, no space for fear. When they finally lifted the soldiers out, snow lashing the rotors, she felt the same calm she'd known on the ridge, that strange stillness at the center of chaos. Back at base, as the crew dispersed and the adrenaline ebbed, Captain Torres offered a rare, quiet acknowledgement. "You fly like someone who's already lived through the worst," he said. Luna met his gaze, her voice low but certain. "Maybe I have." He gave a slow nod, the kind reserved for truths beyond explanation. Spring blurred into summer. The regiment's tempo never eased, but Luna carried it differently now. She no longer measured herself against fear or expectation. She simply moved, steady as the compass needle, letting purpose guide her. On a rare day off, she found a letter waiting in her quarters, handwritten, the paper worn. It was from Reeves, the medic from the ridge. "We don't say it enough," he wrote. "That day changed me. You changed me. Because of you, I got to watch my daughter start kindergarten. Because of you, I'm still here to be her dad. I don't know what missions you fly now, but know this: every life you touched still ripples outward. We don't forget." She read it twice, then set it carefully beside the compass. The words settled like a quiet blessing. Months later, she returned to Colorado for a brief leave. This time she hiked alone, the trail winding through high meadows awash in late summer light. At the same overlook she paused, the valley stretched wide beneath a fading sun. She thought of the people who had crossed her life like constellations. Her mother's memory, her father's unwavering presence, Brant and the team, Torres and Harper, Reeves and his daughter she would probably never meet. The wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere far away, another mission waited, as missions always did. But here, in this moment, she felt no urgency, only the deep, grounded knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She unclipped the silver star from the inside of her pack. The metal caught the dying light, a quiet shimmer. She held it for a long time, then placed it gently on the rock beside her, not as an offering, not as a burden, just as a truth. Her voice barely rose above the breeze. "Sometimes," she whispered, "coming home isn't a place, it's a way of standing in the world." The sun slipped behind the mountains, leaving the sky awash with violet and gold. Luna breathed in the cold, clean air, the kind that tastes of beginnings. Somewhere a helicopter drummed across the horizon, distant and unseen. She listened until the sound faded into the vast silence. Because missions will always call. Because purpose never sleeps. Because the sky is endless, and so is the quiet strength it demands. She closed her eyes, the compass warm in her palm, the ridge alive in her memory, the future wide open. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.